winning back the White House. What a difference a few weeks makes. Before President Biden dropped out of the presidential race, that was 3 weeks ago today, Democrats were discouraged. Republicans were on a roll, and it looked like Donald Trump was well on his way to winning back the White House. Now, a new New York Times Siena poll of the battleground states likely to determine who will win shows that the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket has the momentum, leading Trump-Vance by 4 points among likely voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That's a dramatic change after what the Times is calling the worst 3 weeks of Donald Trump's 2024 campaign.
Gee, I wonder whether or not they're biased.
After a rough start as Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance is now leading the Republican effort to define the Harris.
I love how they say rough start. What was the rough start? When everybody tried to call him weird and keyed in on a statement that he made 3 years ago?
Walz ticket and to regain the momentum. I caught up with him this weekend at his home state of Ohio. We started with the state of the race. Thank you for joining us, Senator Vance. So,
thanks for being here.
I saw Kamala Harris said that she's the underdog in this race. Is that the way you see it? I mean, are you guys still the front runners here?
Look, I think that we are going to have a very tight election, John, and that we just have to sprint to the finish line. We have about 88 days to actually persuade the American people that President Trump should be their president and be their vice president. And I think you just take nothing for granted. You don't believe any polls, whether the ones that are good for you or bad for you. You just try to persuade people as much as you can, and the chips are going to fall where they are.
But Trump seems to think that he's got a huge lead. I mean, you said this at the press conference. He suggested it could be a landslide looking at polls. Do you tell him that you need to kind of like...
Did you see the look on his face? He was rather contemptuous there.
Temper expectations?
I think President Trump is extremely confident. Look, I'm extremely confident. I think we're going to win. I also think that we have to work as hard as possible for the remainder of the election to try to persuade Americans to vote for us. That's the name of the game. But yeah, look, do I think President Trump is actually as confident as he pretends to be in public? Yes, he actually is. But we still have to work very hard.
So there's been a lot of talk about racism and whatnot. You faced some really nasty stuff.
All they do is talk about racism. They're not going to talk about issues. This is ABC. They are just going to continue to try to frame everything via the color of skin.
I saw this thing that Nick Fuentes, of course, he's an avowed white supremacist. He said, what kind of a man marries somebody named Usha? Clearly, he doesn't value his racial identity, his heritage. I mean, this is racist garbage.
Yes, it is.
But this is also a guy that dined with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago during this campaign.
Well, and that Donald Trump doesn't know anything about and frankly doesn't care for. But yeah, look, my attitude to these people attacking my wife is she's beautiful, she's smart. What kind of man marries Usha? A very smart man and a very lucky man, importantly. Yeah. And my view is, look, if these guys want to attack me or attack my views, my policy views, my personality, come after me. But don't attack my wife. She's out of your league.
But, I mean, that dinner that Trump had, and of course it was Kanye.
Yeah, like Trump knows absolutely every single person that shows up in his presence.
That's the guy that's praised Hitler, who arranged it all. That was back a year and a half ago, and Trump still hasn't given a full-throated denouncement of this guy who said that terrible stuff, but he said, I mean, he's a white supremacist.
Look, I think President Trump has issued plenty of condemnations on this. The one thing that I like...
No, because like when Donald Trump said that both the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists should be condemned totally during Charlottesville, all they did was focus in on fine people on both sides. This is the media. This is the game that they're running. They're just continually trying to frame Trump in terms of he associates with racists. He is a racist. ... That's what they're trying, the point that they're trying to convey to their viewers.
The one thing I like about Donald Trump, John, is that he actually will talk to anybody, but just because you talk to somebody doesn't mean you endorse their views. And look, I mean, Donald Trump spent a lot of quality time with my wife. Every time he sees her, he gives her a hug, tells her she's beautiful, and jokes around with her a little bit. I'm not at all worried about Donald Trump. I'm worried sometimes about these ridiculous attacks. But again, this is what you sign up for when you come into politics. I wish people would keep it focused on me, but whatever. They're going to say what they're going to say. My wife's tough enough to handle it, and that's a good thing.
All right, let's focus on something that's gotten a lot of attention. I mean, you know, this cat ladies comment. You talk about Democrat Party dominated by childish cat ladies. Put that aside. You also made a policy proposal.
Yes.
Which was why Tucker Carlson had you on for that interview.
And you said you advocated giving extra votes to people with children, which seems a little.
Well, John, it's not a policy proposal. It's a thought experiment, right? Democrats said we should give children the right to vote. Some Democrats had said we're going to give children the right to vote. And I said, well, if we're going to give the rights to the children, then we should actually just allow the parents to cast those votes, right? I trust a parent more with a decision like that than I do, say, a 14-year-old. So it's a thought experiment.
That's a great answer, and it's a fair question that he asked right there, other than he framed it as childless cat ladies earlier.
There are, though, policy positions behind my view that the country should become more pro-family, right? One thing I learned as a dad is after our second child we brought home, we have 3 little kids, we got these ridiculous surprise medical billings from the hospital because we had chosen an out-of-network provider, of course, at this most stressful of all imaginable moments. I've actually introduced legislation to stop moms and dads from having to go through those surprise medical billings. We want to expand the child tax credit. There's so much that we want to do, John, to make the country more pro-family. And I think it is frankly shameful that the Harris administration has lied about what I actually said. Look, sometimes family doesn't work out for people, and that's okay. But I do think that Kamala Harris herself has pursued some anti-family policies, and that is a problem and something we ought to push back against.
So I put aside whatever.
Just for the record, this is the guy that they are trying to frame as weird, somebody who's pro-family, very eloquent, cogent, and to the point. This is who they're trying to frame as weird. Meanwhile, cackling Kamala, they're trying to reframe as joyous.
Other people. I mean, I listened to your entire speech. I listened to the whole thing, and I saw. And you did say you weren't talking about people who physically can't have children. I mean, that's not what you were saying.
Well, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, right?
And it didn't work out. You did say that. You called it throat clearing, I think. You said, look, I'm not talking about that. But you did
because
say,
I knew people would try to misrepresent it, so it's important to be clear.
Let's look at what you exactly said.
Very good.
When you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power. You should have more of an ability to speak your voice in a democratic republic than the people who don't have kids. I mean, you are directly saying that people with kids should have more of a voice in our democracy. Thought experiment or not about how that is done, but that is the principle. And I mean, I could read on, but you are expressing a principle here.
Again, John, it's a thought experiment. I've been a senator for 2 years. Have I proposed any legislation to the effect? Of course not. Sometimes people make remarks in response to something that somebody else has said. If it was a policy proposal, I would have made the policy proposal in my 2 years in the United States Senate. Now, I do think, John, to be clear here, because I think it's important to focus on what I actually said, I do think becoming a parent affects you in a very profound way. I've seen friends of mine, certainly in my own life, becoming a father does really give you this incredible perspective. You have this little life that you have to take care of. It's an amazing thing, and it does make you think differently about your responsibilities. So yeah, I absolutely do think that being a parent changes you in a profound way. I do not think that we ought to be changing the way that we do votes in this country. I was responding to a Democratic proposal in a very, very thought experiment way.
And you predicted that you would get attacked. You said, I'm sure the Atlantic, the Washington Post will come out and say, well, doesn't this mean non-parents don't have as much of a voice as parents? Doesn't it mean that parents get a bigger say in how our democracy functions? Yes, absolutely. So do you regret saying that? You take that back?
Look, John, again, I'm talking about a thought experiment here. And do I regret saying it? I regret that the media and the Kamala Harris campaign has frankly distorted what I said.
How's that distorted?
Because that is all that the Democrats do. They are distorting it by stating that this is the policy that he wants to enact when he's firmly stated that if he wanted to enact the policy, he could have attempted to do so as a U.S. senator. When people propose something like we should give children the votes, then he says we should give parents the right to cast them because children don't know anything. And I've got 4 of them, so believe me when I tell you this. It is not a good idea to give my 6-year-old the right to vote. I'll cast his vote anyways. I'll fill out his ballot for them, just the same way that the Democrats are filling out the ballots for those infirmed in elder homes and in hospice.
Well, I just read your words. How's that distorting what you said?
Because they just turned this into a policy proposal that I never made, John. I said I want us to be more pro-family. And
He's saying exactly what I just said.
And I do think, look, when you're a parent and you have children, you obviously have a different perspective. And I said that too, and I certainly believe that. But I think that the idea, John, that I actually want to change the American voting system to give 12-year-olds the right to vote and then to give control over it to their parents, it's ridiculous. I never said that. I was responding to a Democratic line.
Okay.
Very good answer.
I mean, it was a speech on the. Anyway, we'll people. The speech is online. People can
Please,
watch
but in the beginning, John, I say Democrats have proposed giving these rights to children. I say if we're going to give them to children, let the parents cast that vote.
So I want to ask you about abortion. There's this proposed amendment that's going to be on the ballot in Florida that basically codifies a constitutional right, state constitutional right, to have an abortion up to about 24 weeks. I assume this is something you oppose.
Well, what I believe, and I'm running to be the vice president of the United States, is that the American people have to make this decision. And President Trump has said explicitly they're going to make this decision on a state-by-state level. He won the nomination of our party. He's determined what the platform is. And I think that he's doing something that's actually very, very important, which is to try to help the country find some common ground. Look, California is going to have a less restrictive abortion policy than Ohio, where we're sitting. Ohio is going to have a less restrictive abortion policy than Alabama. I think the people have to make these decisions, and that's the way for us to come together as a country over a very tough issue.
But this should be, I assume this is an easy one for you. I mean, you've been very clear about how you feel about abortion. I mean, if you've compared it to slavery.
I didn't compare it to slavery, John.
The impact on the society of slavery, yes.
Ask the question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, just again, the idea of codifying, whatever the state, codifying a right to abortion up to about 24 weeks. Isn't that something you oppose?
Well, look, in Ohio, we had a referendum in the state, and
you made your position
and I aggressively advocated for the pro-life view because I want to save as many babies as possible. Also, importantly, John, the people of Ohio decided by about a 60-40 margin to reject the pro-life framing, and you have to respect the will of the people. That's all that Donald Trump has said. That's what I believe. And as someone who really does want to say, John, I do want us to become a more pro-family country. I want us to have more babies and more families. I want our neighborhoods to be filled with the laughter of children and thriving families. We and the pro-life community, I think, have to figure out how to better make our case to the American people and how to make it easier to have a baby. It's way too expensive. Housing is through the roof. Medical costs are through the roof. President Trump and I have actually advanced a series of policies that would make it easier for us to have families. I think that's where we're focused on as a presidential ticket. And as the president has said, on abortion policy specifically, the states are going to make up their minds.
And Donald Trump's going to have a chance to vote on that. He says he's going to offer his position, didn't say what it was. Would you be disappointed if Donald Trump says that he supports a constitutional right to abortion?
You see, the reason that they're keeping on abortion and on Florida is because they want viewers to take away from this interview that they are going to bar women from getting abortions. That's why they continue to be on it. Donald Trump has stated many times that he is not going to sign a national abortion ban, that he wants it left to the states. And as J.D. Vance just told us, that Ohio rejected by a 60-40 margin what the pro-life framing of the bill. But yet they keep going and going and going on this subject. There's a reason for it. There's a reason they're not talking about inflation, about the economy. And you should be able to take adversarial interviews, which J.D. Vance has done. This is the second video that I've made about J.D. in an adversarial position against a reporter that's asking questions. Fine, good. Maybe these questions should be adversarial, but so should Kamala Harris be able to submit herself to a non-softball interview, which she hasn't because she is far less eloquent than J.D. Vance, than Donald Trump, because she's a doofus.
Abortion?
I'll let Donald Trump offer his position, and I'll talk about it then.
What would you encourage him to do on that, though? I mean, this is a pretty fundamental idea for you. I mean,
John, what
you've
I would
been such a leader in the
what
pro-life movement.
I would encourage him to do is to do what he's done up to this point, which is to try to find some common ground here and try to advance some pro-family policy so that people feel like they have more options, right? A lot of the reason that women choose to terminate a pregnancy is very often they don't feel like they have any other choice. We want to give them more options to choose to have that baby, to make it easier to raise that baby. I think Donald Trump has shown real leadership by focusing on that and not on the culture war topic of what each individual state's abortion policy should be.
You've said that Donald Trump is the greatest president of your lifetime.
He is.
Who, in your mind, is the greatest vice president of your lifetime?
It's a good question. I haven't thought much about that. I think George H.W. Bush did a very good job as vice president. You could pick a number of guys who've done a perfectly fine job, but the president really sets the tone for policy, and I think a lot more about the president than about the vice president. And fundamentally, my role in the administration is to support him in enacting the agenda. That's what I'm going to
That was a pretty lame question that nobody really cares about.
work on.
Trump was asked recently very directly, would you be ready to be president on day one?
Sure.
When he arrived. And it was notable that he didn't answer the question. Instead, what he said is the vice presidential candidate doesn't matter. I mean, what did you make when you heard him not answer that directly?
Well, he said that a million times,
He
both
said-
in private
he said the
and
part
in
about
public.
but he
He's-
was asked
and he-
really
by the way, he's
directly,
right.
are you ready?
Most people, oh, come on, John. He's right. Most people, 99% of the country, they don't vote on who the vice presidential nominee. They're voting for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris, not for JD or Tim Walz, right? But what I think that he does believe, because he made it the main focus of his vetting process, is, do I think this person can be president on day one if, God forbid, something happens? Yes. So I absolutely am sure that Donald Trump is confident in my abilities. I also think that he's right, that the politics of this really don't matter that much.
One of the proposals that's in the
Good
platform,
answer.
you've talked about it, Trump's talked about it, is a mass deportation. Now, I know he said you'll start with the easy ones, the criminals, people commit crimes, deport them. But he said deporting 15 to 20 million people. How do you actually do that?
Well, John, we have to start with the fact that we have a wide open southern border because our border czar actually set a lot of open border policies. They suspended.
She's not actually, she wasn't the border czar.
Oh, that was what the
There we
media
go.
called her.
I
She
know, but-
assumed the title. She had control over a lot of our border policy at a time.
That is how they defend her. They call her the border czar, and then they gaslight you and say that we never said that. This guy's a master criminal. He's an innocent angel. We never said that. We never said, even though we have video of him breaking in and stealing valuable paintings, we never called him that because it doesn't fit our narrative at the moment. This is gaslighting to the extreme. Of course, Kamala Harris was the border czar. She was appointed and had full control over it.
When they were suspending, let me finish, John. The time they were suspending deportations,
Yeah.
they stopped Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, and they reinstituted catch and release. They basically threw open the gates of our country, and now we have a ton of fentanyl, a ton of people
But
suffering.
how are you going to get 10
and
to
a ton of
15 to 20
Americans.
million people
Well,
out
the
of the
first
country?
thing you have to do is to stop the bleeding, stop the open border, get Kamala Harris out of there, and actually re-implement the Remain in Mexico policy, rebuild or finish Donald Trump's border wall, and you do that and you stop the bleeding. Now, you're right. Once you do that, once you stop Kamala Harris's open border policies, you've got to do something with the people who are already here. And
Good on JD Vance for keeping on repeating that. This is what the media does. This is how they convince you of something. But you can hear something enough times. It's Kamala Harris's open border policy. Kamala Harris borders are. Keep repeating that because that's what the media does to you. And that's how you influence people also.
I think that you take a sequential approach to it. You are going to have to deport some people. If you're not willing to deport a lot of people, you're not willing to have a border when there are 20 million illegal aliens in our
But
country.
10 to 15 million people, this is like, I mean...
Well, John, I think that's the wrong attitude to take of it. Okay,
I mean, you go knock on
there
doors and ask people for their
well,
papers.
again, but
what do you do?
let me. I think this is the wrong attitude towards it. Right? There's 20 million people here illegally. You start with what's achievable. You do that. And then you go on to what's achievable from there. I think that if you deport a lot of violent criminals, and frankly, if you make it harder to hire illegal labor, which undercuts the wages of American workers, I think you go a lot of the way to solving the illegal immigration problem. But look, President Trump is absolutely right. You cannot have a border unless you're willing to deport some people. I think it's interesting that people focus on, well, how do you deport 18 million people? Let's start with 1 million. That's where Kamala Harris has failed, and then we can go from there.
And finally,
Good
before we
answers.
go, we commit to this race to kind of sticking to the facts. I mean, I heard Donald Trump give this speech in Montana he just gave, and he said that Tim Walz.
Oh, Donald Trump is so gross. Oh, look at me. I'm disgusted by Donald Trump. Ew, I'm just like some gay guy, I think, and I'm just so disgusted with Donald. Will you be promised to stick to the facts?
Signed a letter letting the state kidnap children to change their gender, that allowing pedophiles to claim, I mean, to be exempt from crimes. I mean, this is not true. It's not remotely true.
Well, what President Trump said, and I haven't watched the whole rally.
What he said was not true.
What President Trump said, John, is that Tim Walz has supported taking children from their parents if the parents don't consent to gender reassignment. That is
kidnapping.
By the way, Tim Walz gets on his high horse about mind your own damn business. One way of minding your own damn business, John, is to not try to take my children away from me if I have different moral views than
allowing
you.
the state to kidnap
Children
to change their
How would
sexual
you?
identity.
What I just explained to you, I would describe as kidnapping, John. He has absolutely done this stuff. It's not crazy, John. Come on.
It's not.
You should not.
There are parents in Canada who have had their children taken from them and been excommunicated from their lives because one parent supported gender reassignment surgery, chopping off their genitals, and the father usually was against it. And they are no longer in contact with the children. This is a law that is passed basically in California and in Minnesota. How is that not kidnapping somebody's children, taking their parental rights away from them as the state guards them from the parent that doesn't want their genitals chopped off? That is kidnapping, isn't it?
You should not be able to take people's children away from them.
And that's not what he's proposed.
If you disagree with decisions about gender reassignment, yes, he has proposed that, John. He
Bingo.
Absolutely has. Now, here's the more important thing, John. Why are we talking about inflation? Why are we talking about the fact that groceries are unaffordable thanks to Kamala Harris's policies, and so is housing? We've talked a little bit about the border. Why are we talking about the fact that the entire world is on fire because Kamala Harris's foreign policy, she's just asleep at the wheel? We have a set of plans. You talk about sticking to the facts. Donald Trump and I have a set of plans to lower the cost of housing and food, to bring peace back to the world with American leadership. That is all that we want to do. And I think it's telling that the Harris administration is focused so much on these side issues instead of on the real substance of why Americans are unhappy with Kamala Harris's
To be
leadership.
clear, I just asked you about something that Donald Trump brought up, not something the Harris campaign brought up. I was asking you about Donald Trump's
No, I'm
words.
saying that
Thank you.
But John, the Harris campaign, what are their policy views? They don't have a policy position on their website. Should she sit down and answer tough questions with you?
Yes,
I think she should.
absolutely.
Where is she?
Well,
but we respect the American people enough.
We hope she'll be on the show soon.
I hope so too.
Look at that guy's body language. It's defensive. It's weak. The reporter. It's defensive. It's weak. It's insecure. Yeah, it's yeah. I don't like the guy. He's not likable. What do you guys think? Leave it in the comments.
The person who wants to be our president ought to sit down for some tough interviews. I'm willing to do it, and I wish you would too.
All right, JD Vance, thank you for your time. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
John.
it.
Appreciate it, man.
So again, the question is, why doesn't Kamala Harris submit herself to these interviews? Because, of course, as we all know, she's a flunky, because she's a retard, because she's going to cackle herself, and she's very insecure. And that is why she cackles. That I can pretty much guarantee. She's asked a tough question. She doesn't take the time. But in terms of JD, he came in to once again, a hostile interview. And I don't think that these interviews should be a layup. I think that they should make it hard for the candidate because that's how you get to know them. But a lot of these guys' questions were about Donald Trump, and the framing was completely not on the issues, but framing the Republicans as the bad guy, as they do over and over again. And that's been the media's job, and I really hope that the public can see through this, because I don't think that ABC News is going to treat Kamala Harris in the same manner. They just won't. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Peace out.